Again, welcome. My name is Mariam Tasif Abbasi. I'm the Brownfield Development Manager at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Like I mentioned a few seconds ago, this is part 7 in our ECRGenius series. We've been doing several different modules on all things ECRG. Those are all available on our website just at a quick click. Today, we're going to be focusing on the agreement terms and conditions. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off because I'm going to face away from the screen. But I did want to make some introductions today. From DTSC joining us are Colin Hendricks, who is part of our legal team, and he was very instrumental in helping develop this agreement template. We also, hi Colin. We also have Jennifer Black, who is the branch chief of the Grants and Program Support Branch. She actually is the manager for all administrative aspects of the ECRG. There's no one, I think, in our department who understands better the whole machine that goes behind reimbursements than Jennifer. So we're really happy that she was able to join us today. We, of course, also have several members of DTSC staff online and several members of the Center for Creative Land Recycling, our Brownfield technical provider, online as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, and we are going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So the ECRG agreement basically outlines the terms and conditions of the ECRG. In addition to the recitals and several different content areas that I'm going to be walking through today, I wanted to draw your attention to the number of exhibits that we have attached to this agreement. So basically, a lot of the things that we've been emphasizing in our previous content when we've been providing the overview of the ECRG, the application, site map, site diagram, the access agreement, which we emphasize very greatly for situations where the grantee is not going to be the site owner. The scope of work is really important because a lot of the funding is based on the scope of work that's outlined in the application. Of course, the activities budget and detail table is also incredibly important because it ties into the allocation of the ECRG. The equitable development grant commitments are also important because that's something that we've asked for and we want to, fold into the grant. And then we just have an example of a summary of cost form that we want to see when it comes to reimbursement requests. So those are things I'm going to be walking through today. There's a lot of information in the agreement itself when it comes to outlining the terms and conditions. We were just discussing before we launched this webinar that this agreement is relatively clear and brief compared to some of the other agreements that we've seen for grants. And I didn't focus on kind of walking through every single thing, but I do have these sort of primary topics that I wanted to walk everyone through today. So when it comes to fund conditions and invoicing, as we've mentioned in our guidelines and in previous sessions, these funds are solely for ECRG activities. And the reason why we emphasize this a lot is because there is an overlap sometimes in the way the stories for the application are presented. There's the cleanup, and the cleanup leads to reuse. And there also may be some overlap in activities. And for that reason, we really always try to emphasize that the ECRG funding is for the ECRG activities, which is basically the investigation and the cleanup and activities that are directly related to the these environmental activities. These are outlined in the application, which are folded into the agreement. And of course, because we require regulatory oversight, we want these activities to be approved by the regulatory agency who's involved with managing your site. Invoices that are considered to be eligible costs as specified in the scope of the ECRG activities and the associated budget table. Those are all pieces of your application that get folded into the agreement, and the invoicing are based upon that understanding that DTSC has approved those documents. Just like you're submitting the application through the Flux portal, your Flux portal, when you become a grantee, is going to change a little bit, and you'll now be entering into the grantee portal instead of the applicant portal. And your invoices will be submitted through this portal, and you'll also have the ability to be able to track your expenses and look at where your invoices are in the process and how many invoices you've submitted to date and how much has been paid out. So we think that this is going to make it easier for everyone, including us, to track the spend on the ECRG grants. One of the things that we wanted to remind you is that the invoices do need to be batched in batches of about 15,000. Once you reach that, as soon as you reach that, we ask you to go ahead and submit the request so we can get those processed as quickly as possible. The $15,000 minimum doesn't apply to like the final invoices, and that's something that we don't have to worry about right now, but I did want to point that out. And there is a specific form that we have in Exhibit I of the agreement. Please take an opportunity to go ahead and go through the entire agreement and take a look at that form. That's just like a top sheet to include with your invoice batching, so that it's a little bit easier for us to review and manage the payments of these invoices for which you're requesting reimbursement. We will review all the invoice requests, approve them, and accept all of the approved, process the approved invoices for payment. And generally, we have a 60 to 90 day payment term. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, what if there are changes in the scope? Oops, I'm going to go ahead and fix this typo right now. What if there are changes in the scope of work and the cost? And one of the things I've been reminding everybody is that this is a new grant. It's the first time we're doing this. At this time, it seems reasonable that if there is a legitimate reason to make an adjustment to the scope of work of the ECRG or the scope or the cost for the ECRG, that's something that we should be able to discuss. But we just don't know how much funding we'll have available and what that process is going to look like. And so what we ask for is, at this time, all we can say is that if there is any reason to make that change, go ahead and request that change in writing. We will address it on a case-by-case basis, and it really depends on the timing, whether we have funding available, the number of requests we receive, and so there's just a lot of variables associated with this. So at this time, we are not ready to make a commitment that if you make a request for a scope change or a cost change, that will actually be able to get approved. But we definitely are open to at least having the discussion. We've talked a lot about contracts over the past few weeks, and I know we've discussed it during the pre-qualifying application period, and we have a lot of information on the contracting process included in our guidelines. We've stated that contracts should generally be obtained through a competitive process. I think we have I think it's contracts above $10,000. We understand with all organizations, there's a limit. Sometimes it's not beneficial, perhaps, to get into have every contract go through this process, but definitely anything 10,000 and above. You may be asked to make records of your procurement process available to DTSC for our audits, so that we can, go in and double check and see what that looks like. It also helps us learn about the different processes that are incorporated by different types of organizations. So that's another reason why we may want to take a look at your procurement records and also verify the commitments that you're making to us and the reporting that you're doing on the ECRG activities. We say this a lot, but we also want to see that there is an effort made to incorporate small businesses and other disadvantaged business enterprises in the work that you're doing. This is the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant with a strong emphasis on equity. Equity can be achieved in many ways, and we want to try and incorporate as many approaches as possible, which is why equity in contracting is something that we are encouraging very highly, and I'm hoping to see that translated into ECRG work. The Equitable Development Grant Commitments, that's something that we've had an ECRGenius webinar on. And these are going to be self-identified in the application. There's a specific table associated with making measurable and quantifiable commitments associated with advancing economic opportunity, preventing displacement, promoting access to transportation, developing safer communities, and generally promoting environmental justice. So those are the categories where we're looking to achieve equity in development, and we are really interested to see what these commitments look like. We, as we've mentioned in some of our previous talks on this topic, we're not exactly sure what this should look like, because we know there's lots of options and lots of methodologies that can be utilized to make these achievements. And so whatever is put forth in the application will translate into the agreement as well. We do have reporting requirements. There are going to be quarterly reports, and what we're going to try and do is create a fixed format for reporting. We're going to see if we can try and set up the reporting so it's done through Flux directly, so they're not independent reports that are sent. That is something that we're still working on. And there's some like general information that we want to see in every single report. So the most important thing for us to understand is, what is the progress on the ECRG activities? How are ECRG funds being spent? Are there any barriers that have popped up that may delay either the reuse project or the environmental activities? And because the reimbursement process is very important to us, we also want to keep a handle on what are the expenses and what are the expenses to come. We always want to also know about public engagement and how communities are being involved and engaged throughout the ECRG process. One of the things that's also really important that I wanted to kind of share with everyone today is that, we understand that ownership changes, partners change. There's a lot that happens to bring land, to a higher and better use. But it's very important that any change in ownership or partnership be noticed to DTSC well in advance. The reason is that the ECRG is, made to the grantee based on a very specific set of circumstances that are described in the application. If those circumstances are changed, we need to understand what those changes are and whether ECRG is still eligible and whether that's still a good fit for us and for you as well. And so that's another really important aspect of reporting. This is a topic that we also get questioned about a lot, and I want to be very clear, and that's why it's a very simple 2-bullet slide. Prevailing wage is required for all ECRG funded contracts. Prevailing wage is not required for activities that may overlap with the ECRG tasks or related to the ECRG tasks in some way, but are not covered by the ECRG funding. An example could be if different aspects of a cleanup are being funded differently. So if there is a big high cost cleanup, a portion of it is being done under the ECRG, but there's another portion that's not being done under the ECRG because there's another funding source for it, for example. So, under those circumstances, we're not requiring that all aspects of that work, even though the work is related, even though it's an environmental activity. We're not asking that that be subject to prevailing wage. We're very, very specific that prevailing wage only apply to the, is only required to apply to the ECRG funded work. I mean, but of course we are very encouraging a prevailing wage to be applied across the board, but it's only required for the ECRG work. I wanted to draw everyone's attention to non-compliance. There's a section on this in the agreement, and it's an important thing to look at because on my next slide, I'm going to talk about how the agreement is non-negotiable. So I thought it was really important to highlight the components of the non-compliance section. We're looking for collaboration in the ECRG. That's the only way to make the ECRG successful, by making sure we're working together in a timely way, because the schedules are very tight. We are asking for a lot of work to be done in a very fast time frame, and so for us, non-compliance will be a failure to respond to DTSC requests in a timely manner, being non-responsive to the regulatory agency, and of course some of the standard things like making false statements. We are vetting these applications as much as we can, but if we find out that false statements were made, then that definitely is grounds for non-compliance. It's important that the proposed reuse is in fact a proposed reuse for the site. We do understand that there are some changes that could happen, but it's important through the reporting component of the ECRG and through routine conversations with the DTSC project manager that you'll be working with, that if there are changes in the proposed reuse, it's important that those are discussed, because there may be situations where the proposed reuse is no longer renders the project no longer eligible for ECRG funding. So those are things that we need to be kept in the loop on so that we can advise everyone accordingly. Of course, we want the ECRG work to be conducted within the time frame. We want to make sure that what I mentioned earlier about making sure that we are aware of who's going to be taking ownership of the site if there's going to be a change. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to make sure that we're aware of. And I'm going to correct my typo, that we are aware of and notified, and failure to notify, could render you in non-compliance. Okay, I think there's just some statements over here that I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And this is the another point of emphasis, that it's really important that whoever is the legal signatory, and I think I actually had that highlighted on the next slide, review the agreement before the application is submitted, because the provisions of the agreement are not subject to negotiation. What we're planning is that when we have the decisions made, we're going to be generating the agreements, hopefully through the Flux system, and we're going to ask that those agreements be signed as quickly as possible. There are many reasons for that. I think the most important reason is that because we don't pay for any costs that occur prior to the signing of the ECRG agreement, that's the go date, that's the start date, that's the day when the funds are effective. So we want to get these agreements signed as quickly as possible. And so I think one of the closing statements of the application itself is that by signing this application, you're actually, making an agreement to sign these terms and conditions. And so I just really wanted to emphasize this fact. And all of our signatures are not hard signatures; they're all done via DocuSign. I just wanted to point out that the agreement should be signed by anyone who has the legal authority to sign on behalf of the grantee organization, and city council resolutions are not required by us. But if it's a process that your municipality requires, then that's what it requires. We're not speaking to who should or who shouldn't. We're just letting you know that we don't require it. And I think that brings us towards the end of my presentation. I just wanted to remind everybody that our Brownfield Technical Assistance Provider, ECRGenius, is available to support you. They are still taking TA calls, providing last minute feedback and direction for anyone and everyone who's working on their application or interested in starting an application. So please definitely reach out to them and have a conversation with them if you have questions and need some guidance. And before we get into questions, I did want to announce that our California Land Recycling Conference is scheduled in Carson for late June. And there is going to be a lot of really good, relevant information on how to take brownfields, reuse, rebuild, and revitalize your communities. And of course, we do have to give a plug for Ignacio Dayrit's very famous brownfield sing-along that everybody knows and loves, and it's finally coming back. So with that, I am going to turn this over to ECRGenius, and we can take some questions.
Thank you, Miriam. This is Natalie Nava with ECRGenius. I actually don't see any questions in the chat, but please, if people have questions, welcome to unmute yourself and ask it or put it in the chat. So I just want to give people a few minutes to do that.
Okay. And I mean, it's okay if there are no questions. We just wanted to go through the terms and conditions of the agreement so that we are, as transparent and open as possible, and give everyone an opportunity to ask a question if there was one. But I think everyone's happy to close out early if we can as well. So no pressure to ask questions.
Okay, great.
And we also have the ECRG mailbox if they have questions after.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for reminding us of that.
Okay, I think we are good. I don't see any questions. Oh, there's another. Oh, message. Nope, we're good.
Okay, great. Thanks for putting in the email addresses. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to letting us go over this information with you today. And we're all available if there are questions that come up after you had a chance to digest this information. Natalie, we usually take a couple of days to post the information on our website, correct?
Yeah, it just takes a day or two to, put it on YouTube, but we can email everybody these slides that has registered, and it'll also be on the DTSC website.
Yeah.
So we'll get this up quickly.
Okay, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And we hope to see your applications in a couple of weeks.